Since the beginning of humanity, people have been killing each other. Are we going to keep this behavior up until the end of time? Does this mean that we cannot control our violent instincts? Maybe we would rather kill each other. Does this mean that violence is an inherent need for any human being? If so, is there a monster within us, waiting for the right opportunity to eliminate his enemies? Or does this bleak picture of human nature exist for a hidden purpose?
Crashed into one of the towers of
I started boxing years ago. I felt the need to get rid of any violent energy that haunted me. This method worked back then, and still does to this day. If everyone found something similar that helped them, just as boxing did for me, maybe the world would be less violent.
When faced with authority figures, people will do things that are horrible.
كل الناس لازم يشاركوا في الرقابة على أداء الجهاز الشرطي وأداء أي جهاز داخل الدولة لديه أدوات العنف.
It would be all about survival of the friendlies. That is our secret superpower.
Some people claim that humans are inherently violent and that civilization is trying to keep their behavior peaceful. But others argue that people are actually inherently peaceful and that civilization is the cause of their violence. I wonder who is right. Anthropologists say that the human hand may have evolved to excel at delivering a punch. Does this mean that we are programmed to fight? And is there anything we can do to change that? Violent events such as World War II led to experiments in the field of social psychology. Take the Milgram experiment as an example, which focused on the conflict between obedience to authority and human conscience. Stanley Milgram and his team at Yale University recruited a group of volunteers and instructed them to inflict pain on others using electrical shocks. The results seem to confirm the cruelty of the human race. So, is violence within human nature? Or is it within our upbringing? Scientists such as anthropologist Charles Golden have been researching the answer to that question.
Hi, Charles, how are you?
Well, it's great to be here.
First, let's start by defining what is violence.
We consider violence as physical or verbal aggression against another individual.
Do you think violence could be an inheritance from our prehistoric past?
There is a very basic evolutionary need to protect ourselves, and that's what we call fight or flight. And we either run away or we attack those who are attacking us. And that kind of violence, obviously, it leads to survival, so is very important. But unfortunately, when you become a social animal and you interact with other people a lot rather than being a hunter-gatherer, those basic instincts become counterproductive. And that is the problem that we face today in dealing with modern man.
What is the neocortex? And can you tell me what is its relation to violence?
The cortex around the brain grew up to allow us to become social creatures, allowed us to develop speech, it allows us to develop our understanding of social relationships, it allows us to solve problems, and it also allows us to control the basic instincts that are deep inside the brain. And then as we get older and older, we develop, in theory, If the brain develops correctly, we develop the way to what we call inhibit those areas of the brain so that we can sit and say, yes, I'm angry. Yes, I want to injure that person, or I have the impulse to do it, but I'm not going to do it.
What did they want to prove exactly with the Milgram experiment?
Milgram and many people of that generation had just gone through World War II. And the idea was to understand, why would what appear to be good people do things that the Nuremberg trials and others labeled as horrendous, unbelievable levels of activities towards others. And Milgram showed, unfortunately, that when faced with authority figures, faced with power, people will do things that are horrible and justify that to themselves at the time, even though later, when you talk to them, they say, I don't understand why I did that.
In conclusion, is violence our inevitable fate? Whether out of obedience, fear, or aggressive instincts, do we have no control over how violent we can become? I cannot believe that. It is too scary. I understand that there could be some potential will for destruction buried deep within our nature. But I admit that the results of Stanley Milgram's experiment have left me in shock. I am sure we are also capable of love and compassion. That is why I need to dig deeper. Frankly, I needed to take a closer look at Milgram's experiment. And I have managed to find somebody who already has. Rutger Bregman is a historian and an author. He recently wrote a book titled Humankind, A Hopeful History, providing an optimistic historical perspective on the last 200,000 years of human history. I am eager to hear what he has to say.
Hi, Rutger, how are you?
Hi, Amir. So great to see you.
Do you think we are born violent or we are raised into it?
This is really one of the oldest and deepest questions you can ask. One of the most influential theories in Western culture says that our civilization is just a thin layer, just a thin veneer. And that below that thin line of civilization lies our raw human nature. That deep down, most people are just selfish and nasty, violent, or even monsters. This is the idea that has come back again and again and again in our culture. And I think that idea is wrong.
And why?
Well, what has happened in the last, I'd say, 15 to 20 years is what you could call a silent revolution in science. There have been a huge amount of scientists who have been moving from a quite cynical view of human nature, of who we are as a species, to a more hopeful view. It would be all about survival of the friendliest. That's what scientists now believe, that for the biggest part of our history, it was actually the friendliest among us who had the most kids and had the biggest chance of passing on their genes to the next generation. That is our secret superpower.
Would you say that we are improving as a society in relation to violence?
One of the most interesting questions you can ask as a historian is, what makes human beings special? We like to believe that we are very special because we're super smart, right? So what scientists have now come to believe, that what really is our superpower is not our individual intelligence, it's our collective ability to work together. And the reason we came better at cooperating is because of this process of survival of the friendliest. The best insurance policy you're going to have is friends, right? Friends are going to help you through tough times. So humans are the only animals in the whole animal kingdom with the ability to blush, which is quite striking, right? That our cheeks can become red, that we involuntarily give away our feelings to other members of our species. Now, if you really believe that people are just selfish deep down, then why would we blush? How could that ever be an advantage? Well, the reason it's an advantage for us is because it helps us to cooperate, right? It establishes trust between people. So there's no other animal in the whole animal kingdom that blushes. We are the only ones that do it.
Could you talk to me about the Milgram experiment?
So Stanley Milgram was a young scientist, and what he did, he brought people into the lab and he said, look, I want you to do a simple test, just a simple memory test. In reality, something else was going on. The people were put in a room where they had to push a button on a shock machine, and they could see that, the first shock they would give to someone else was just a small, slight shock of 15 volts. But then if the person in the other room would keep making mistakes, the shock level would go all the way up to 450 volts, which is lethal, right? And so the shocking finding of Stanley Milgram was that as much as 65% of people are willing to go all the way up to 450 volts, only if someone else tells us to do it, right? So this was an extraordinarily pessimistic experiment.
And what doubts and controversies exist around the results of this experiment?
What we now know, because a new generation of scientists has gone into the archives, is that the experiment was, well, almost a hoax. So Gina Perry, she's an Australian psychologist. She's discovered that actually the majority of the participants didn't believe the situation was real. Probably this was going on. It's a phenomenon that is well known in science, that when people come into the lab as a subject, they're helpful, they're friendly, they want to help the scientists to get the results that they want. But this is obviously very dangerous, right? Because if people can guess sort of the goal of the experiment, then, the question is, how reliable are the results?
So why do we keep talking about Milgram's experiment 60 years later, when science has seriously challenged its findings? If we can control the violence within us, why is there this persistent idea that we are more dangerous than we think we are? Why are we constantly being shown images of violent people? Why do the most horrific crimes get the most attention? Is there someone who wants us to think that we live under constant threat from one another, and that we are worse than we really are? We normally doubt strangers and expect the worst of them. Maybe. Our human nature is like that. We don't need any external factor to teach or encourage us. And maybe we as a society are being toyed with just to believe that stuff you are talking about. Maybe there is a will that wants us to always be doubtful and scared. Right. You look like a person in search of someone to blame. What I need to look for is someone to explain to me who are the ones possibly manipulating violence within the society. Why would anybody manipulate us into fearing our neighbors and expecting the worst from them? Who benefits from this overstated perception of violence? If we were this violent, would we appoint someone to control us? If we fear our neighbors, for example, wouldn't we hire someone to protect ourselves from them? From the beginning of history, there is the idea that if we weren't controlled and protected by some authority, we would fall into violent anarchy in a world of crime, both of which ruled with the same laws as a jungle. But do we need leaders and authorities monopolizing violence to keep us safe? Or is it just an attempt to control society instead? Do authorities still believe in Milgram's outdated findings? Or is it a pretense to subject us to their repressive forces to maintain the status quo? In other words, is the police there to keep us safe or under control? Or is it actually to serve another end? Amr Waked is a researcher for Human Rights Watch and has worked as Director of Research at the Arabic Network for Human Rights Information in Cairo, as well as a freelance journalist for several Egyptian and international outlets. I'm confident he will help me find my answers.
ازيك يا أستاذ عمرو؟ أنا سعيد جداً إن حضرتك قبلت الدعوة.
Nice to meet you again. Yeah.
هل وجود البوليس أو قوات الأمن في المجتمع ده من أجل الحماية ولا من أجل السيطرة؟
هي دي الإشكالية الحقيقية، يعني هو ده البارادوكس اللي موجود، إنه أصبح كلنا بنعيش في النيشن ستيت دلوقتي، لكن في نفس الوقت يعني بنجد إنه المؤسسات في الدول اللي ما فيهاش أجهزة منتخبة ديمقراطيا، الحكام اللي مش خاضعين للمساءلة من أي نوع، بيتم استخدام كل هذه الأسلحة والقوة في قمع البشر المخالفين بشكل أساسي، وليس في الدفاع عن الحدود ضد معتدي أجنبي أو مثلا مكافحة الجريمة أو ما إلى ذلك. يعني تركزت هذه القوى الهائلة تماما في يد عدد معدود من البشر، أصبح من حقهم يحركوا الجيوش، يشرفوا على عمل الجهاز الشرطي، ولذلك أصبح من المهم جدا جدا أن يكون في ضمانات قوية وحقيقية ودايما يمكن مراجعتها وتعزيزها من خلال مجموع الناس، وليس فقط من خلال مثلا البرلمان أو حتى الصحافة أو ما، لا، كل الناس لازم يشاركوا في الرقابة على أداء الجهاز الشرطي وأداء أي جهاز داخل الدولة لديه أدوات العنف.
حضرتك تعتقد إن الظلم ممكن يولد العنف عند البني آدمين؟
يعني فكرة إنه لما تواجه بالعنف والبطش والظلم، هدفي في هذه المعركة كإنسان أنا برفض هذا العنف والبطش، مش إني أوقع نفس البطش أو العنف على الشخص الذي ظلمني، ولكن إن أنا أزيل هذا البطش والعنف من المجتمع. فأنا شايف إنه مهم جدا إن الناس اللي بتقول إن هي بتدافع عن العدل والحق إن هي تكون عندها هذه البوصلة، إن أنا مش بدافع أو مش بكره الظلم لأنه واقع عليا أو على أخويا أو على الناس اللي شبهي، أنا بكره الظلم والبطش والتمييز في المطلق، وبالتالي هدافع عن أي شخص آخر يتعرض حتى لو مختلف عني.
Human hands might well be suited for punching or fighting. However, you will also find them suitable for shaking hands with another person, holding a child, or waving at a friend. Perhaps choosing to connect, see each other as equals, and be equally repulsed by violence might free us from our fears and doubts, and free us from the ones who want to keep us afraid and suspicious.